last time you and I spoke, you asked me if I had read the Careless Society, and I was embarrassed to admit that I had never read it.
Oh, well.
But I felt like, one, because you had suggested it, and the fact that it really captured kind of your original thoughts on this struggle with institutionalized care, that it was a good starting place for this project. And so I read it and enjoyed every bit of it. And I the more I got into it, I think the more I understood kind of things that I learned from the Institute, but I don't know that until I read the book, I really understood the fullness of what was behind
Yeah.
some of the work. And so I think I appreciated the Careless Society because I could feel your writing in the Careless Society is very, I use the word prophetic because that's how it hit me. And then that was before I got to the end and you were talking about the prophets and the role of the prophets at the very end. I was like, he may not like me calling him prophetic, but it had that edge. I mean, obviously a lot of the other writings afterward did as well, especially the work you did with Brueggemann, but there was something kind of raw or more more palpable in the Careless Society. And so do you mind if we start with some questions related to that?
Sure, whatever, however best. Let me just say before you start that you sent me an email and it was just phenomenal. I mean, from my point of view, in fact, I saved a note to tell you that. And it both as a summary of the Careless Society, which is better than anything else I've read about it, and also about then applications and questions that you had. And so I was really, that was just one of the more significant documents that I've had this year. So I appreciate all the work you put in to do the reading and then to write it up. It was very impressive.
I really appreciate you saying that because, you know, somebody taking your writings and saying, okay, here's what I gleaned. It's a little scary. I'm like, what if I'm way off? I think my concern is if we jump into here's how your institution can support ABCD, without naming the risks that you name so clearly in the Careless Society of tripping into taking over those functions of the community. That all we can, my fear is we're just going to make better counterfeiters. And we don't want that. You know, here's how you counterfeit better so that you disguise yourself as an association, you disguise yourself as a circle of friends, so that, you know, that is, I think, why I really want to start with where you started, which is the Careless Society in wrestling with this. My first question is really, you know, that email that I sent, I pulled out the more salient pieces that just really shook my core. I was like, that we don't want to lose. When you look at those words that you wrote, and some of them you said way back in, you know, 1974, and the world has changed so much. Do you feel the same? Has anything, those particular comments specifically, would you change anything that you had written and those quotes? I know you can't go back through the whole book.
I might have softened it up a little. It's a fairly in your face document. So I might do something like that. I don't think so in the broad sense that you've been talking about. I do not see any really major turnaround in terms of a lot of neighborhoods taking on functions that service institutions purport to perform. I think that if you said, well, the book is really about showing that those are interactive entities and that the interaction can end up by just vitiating the possibility of citizens really having much agency, power, or say in things. So I know I think the overall point I was making is about the same. I've not been impressed by finding a lot of neighborhood groups who have conceived of themselves as producers of their own well-being, a growing trend. Now, that may tell you more about me being 90 years old and not being out on the road in the neighborhoods, and I just don't see it. But in general, I think things are about the same as they were. So I don't think I would amend anything in that book on the basis of my present observations that said, well, I missed that one. If we're talking about the overall question, I'm probably clearer now about some things that I was not as clear about when I wrote that. Today, I would say I am most interested in what are those things that organized neighbors can do together that will create a sustainable culture of fulfilling functions that only neighbors can do. And sort of wrestling in my own mind with the word culture. What do I mean by that? And let me make a note here, get my notepad. I have just finished creating a list of a set of what I think, I may be completely wrong about this, are the kinds of functions that lead to and kind of actions toward fulfilling the functions that also lead to a culture in the neighborhood. And it grows out of, probably the clearest example of that is the African proverb everybody knows about takes a village to raise a child. Mm-hmm. I found that a very useful question, because if you say to people, a group of people in a neighborhood, how many of you have heard this? Everybody's heard it. And then I say, do you believe it? And everybody says they believe it. And then I say, can you tell me how in this neighborhood, as a village, you have been raising your children, and no answers come forth. Because I'm asking the question collectively, not individually.
Right.
And then everybody can say, I raised my children, or, you know, or there's a kid down the block that every once in a while I talk to when he delivers the newspapers, something like that. So that question has led me to develop a series of questions, which I'll share with you, which I think are the kinds of questions that would activate people to take on functions in a way that builds culture.
Yeah.
Another one, for instance, that the first one on the list just happened to be the first. I got 21 now, and they aren't all mine. I mean, so the first one is, what do you do as a block when someone dies? In other words, are you a we first? All the questions raised first. The question, are you a we? That is, are you organized so you could do something? Do you know what your assets are? Do you see the functions that only you can fulfill? Now, here are some questions that point you toward actions. What do you do when someone on the block is obviously having mental problems? What do you do to celebrate the benchmarks in the lives of the children here when they graduate from elementary school? Do you recognize that, right? What do you do that involves young people in each of the kinds of activities you engage in?
There's a video that we created about bringing back the village.
Oh, good.
And some of those, I'll send you the link. I think you might enjoy it. But it was
I would.
Older. So we did an oral history project and interviewed the senior adults and asked them to their fondest memory of the community. Yeah. And the word village came up over, and it was a village. We all looked out for each other. If I did something on Q Street, by the time I got to T Street, Daddy knew, you know, it's there was this sense of we-ness and communal, like you're talking about. And, you know, because we are so separated, you know, and we don't even know our neighbors. So what grew out of that particular neighborhood was block by block organizing, which I know you're a big fan of. And those block connectors having not only the, you know, it's an authority issue. I think back when Miss T and Mama Winfrey were young, they're now in their 80s. Nobody felt like they were getting in somebody else's space by telling Daddy that Saul Jr., you know, throw rocks at, you know, something. And now everybody is, you know, well, that's not my place, you know. And so having that block structure says there is somebody who is going to take that role. I'm curious. I think at the neighborhood level, I think that question of culture is huge, because I think it's the culture that tells us that we have no place. We're not, that's not our role. You know, I'm not, my job in to call that person's daddy, you know? So our culture has told us a story about where we belong. And if we don't shift the story and the culture, we're not empowered to do anything. Even if we know what's happening is wrong, we're paralyzed by this narrative we feel trapped in.